For those of you who weren't here last time, and I know there's a few who weren't, I am Jessie Mahoney. I'm a pediatrician, and I have worked at Kaiser in pediatrics, like primary care pediatrics, for the last 20 years. I also did some hybrid hospitalist work in that role. And I was a physician wellness leader my whole career. So in this beginning, when physician wellness wasn't a thing, and now when it's a huge thing. And so thankfully for all of you, that's the impetus for this program, is to help you be more well and have a more well career in medicine, pain, psychology, healing ahead. So I graduated from UCSF a pretty long time ago, and I grew up in the Bay Area. So I'm from Berkeley originally. And I went to Dartmouth on the East Coast for college and worked in Washington, D.C. for a few years. And then I moved back to San Francisco for medical school, and I've been here ever since. I love the Bay Area, and I am also so happy that we can go back outside and have fresh air. I do think that the last week was just an amazing opportunity kind of for self-coaching, as we say. When you can't change your external circumstances, you can change your thoughts about them, and you can change your experience of them for the better. Meaning you still can't go outside, but it does really drive home this concept of coaching and how you can change an experience. So maybe an experience of fellowship that might be really difficult, or an experience of waiting, to become an attending that might feel like you're waiting and waiting, and how can you optimize that experience mostly so it benefits you. Often people think of coaching as like this Pollyanna, oh, we'll make a difficult situation great. And that's not actually the purpose, but the purpose is to come up with things that work well for you so that your experience is better. And then you can decide, sometimes we actually decide that we want to be angry about things. And I'll just throw that out there. So I wanted to be angry about the smoke and angry about global warming. So you don't have to change things so that they're always better. So I just want to throw out, it's a tool that you can use in different ways. And, but I'm 100% so excited about the blue sky and such. So I am also a certified coach, and I, did coach training a couple of years ago, actually through a place called the Life Coach School. And I chose that place for my training not because it was not specifically focused on physicians, and it was really focused on everyone. And in part, as a pediatrician, I think, relationships and all of the other things in our life besides being a doctor so much impact our wellness. And so really wanted to be in a place learning about coaching for everyone. And what I discovered there was a huge community of doctors who are also had the same idea and also trained there. And so now I'm actually part of a group. I think there's maybe 100 physicians that have trained there now, and are sort of spreading these teachings. Particularly, we're doing a lot of work in institutions and training programs with the thought that if we can really help support physicians and support their wellness, that we can all be part of the solution to a lot of our systemic problems. And when we're suffering and victims and exhausted and burnt out, we can't really be a part of the system, the solutions to the system. And so it's not that the system is broken. And I always like to say that in coaching, right? It's just healing ourselves so we can be a part of the solution. And other things also need to change. But most importantly, we need to take care of ourselves first, because we can't be there for our patients or those we love or medicine as a whole if we don't do that. And that's really the thought behind coaching. The other training that I have is I am a certified yoga instructor. I won't do any yoga here, but I do really believe in mindfulness. And I believe that it's an incredible tool, particularly for people in healthcare and healing, for us. And also, if we espouse it and learn it, we can teach it to our patients. And there's a lot of evidence around its efficacy in health and preventing chronic disease and inflammatory markers and burnout and stress and depression and anxiety, all of which are part of our lives and part of our culture these days. And so as I coach, I do often bring in some mindfulness techniques because I think they're really easy and simple to add into your life and sort of change your experience in the moment. And if you know some of them, you can teach them to your patients, which first of all makes your job more fun, and you get to practice them while you teach them. So it helps you and it helps them. So I will often throw some of that into our conversations. And I wanted to touch a little bit again on what coaching is, because I know many people, not all of you were here last time, and many people don't really understand what it is. And this month, I just wanted to get to this idea of it's training of the mind. So a lot of people are very comfortable with like a physical trainer. And we were talking about going to the gym, right? And people are perfectly happy to have someone help them exercise and train in that way. And coaching is really training of the mind in a similar way. So as physicians, our minds are actually equally important to our physical wellness. You actually need the physical wellness too. So please don't neglect that. And that is 100% part of wellness as healers, but that all athletes have trainers, and our jobs as healers is actually often much harder than being an athlete. And so just realizing like the training hours are longer, the stakes are actually higher. It's not so much like winning a game, but there are lives being saved or not saved. And we're asked to be on. So for people who are in the OR, you're on for 10, 12 hours, which is much longer than any football game, baseball game, all the things. So all of those people have personal trainers for their sports. They also have nutrition trainers. And these days they have mindfulness trainers and life coaches as well. And so just realizing that this concept of a coach doesn't mean that you're failing or behind. It's sort of a performance tool, happiness tool, an engagement tool, a resilience tool. And that's why so many physicians are jumping in and using it, because it helps in so many different ways. And it helps you at work, but it also helps you the rest of your life. And so for any of you that are considering doing one-on-one coaching, or even here, it's all fair game to bring up, because especially as a physician, I actually don't believe in work-life balance, because it's all life. And I think when you're in medicine, medicine is part of your life. Life is part of your medicine. You can't, and COVID's probably made this even more clear. If you have kids, you can't really separate your kids from your work, and your spouse is part of it. And the tension at home shows up at work when you're in difficult situations. And so all of those things, you bring your mind everywhere you go. And that's where the coaching can be really helpful. And you learn tools in coaching and strategies so that you can change your experience of something that maybe can't be changed. And so COVID is sort of an example where you can change your experience of it and how it's impacting your life. And yet it in and of itself is pretty much out of our control. Maybe as a society it's not, but as individuals it is. And so it's really figuring out how you can shift your experience of potentially a bad outcome, or communication with a difficult attending, things like that come up, or maybe a procedure that you think you should have been able to do, but you couldn't get, and what to do about things like that. So we'll talk a little bit about some of that. And tonight I wanted to just talk about a couple of really simple tools that mostly are mindfulness tools. And I like to start with that because I teach mindfulness as available to everyone, everywhere, always. And let me just, there's one more person to let in here. So mindfulness can be like strict meditation. And if you have time to do that, or you want to do that, that's fantastic. And it brings tremendous benefits. But you can also bring mindfulness into your work, just in terms of being present wherever you are, and not really looking back and sort of figuring out, oh, I could have done this better, or what do I need to be planning? And just this moment of being present relieves a tremendous amount of stress. And the other thing is the power of your breath. And I think most of us who work in medicine and healthcare tend to hold our breaths, and you may not realize it. And now that I tell you this, you'll realize that you hold your breath all the time. And learning how to take deep breaths. And we all know from sort of neurophysiology that changes your nervous system and activates your parasympathetic nervous system and calms things down. So learning how to use your breath to your advantage, and learning how to take deep breaths. And I realize now it's much more complicated with all of the masks and PPEs and protective shields, but it's also that much more important to be in touch with your breath and use your breath as a tool to calm your nervous system and as a tool to give you space. And so the other tool that I really like to talk about is the power of the pause. And most of us don't pause in our daily lives as physicians, or even as, I'm not quite sure what to call the psychology people, but psychologists, is that what we call you? Is that, yeah. Healers. And we tend to not pause. We go from patient to patient to patient. We're busy writing and charts and not thinking and not choosing with intention our responses. We tend to just react. And in many ways, that's trained into us in medicine, right? React as quickly as possible and move on. And you really can improve your doctoring and your caring and your own health and your own life by capitalizing on the space between the stimulus and the response. And when you have that space, which is the pause, you can use that and come up with an intentional response rather than a reaction. And I've worked with a number of you over the last month, and many people notice that they have these just reactions to say something that didn't go like they thought, or something that an attending might have said to them, or a criticism. And then that stays with them and they ruminate about it, and it really impacts their ability to learn and be present for what the work they're trying to do right now. And so realizing that your power is up front in that space, excuse me, and trying to take that to your advantage. The key piece of that is noticing and being aware. And I will say that most of us don't do that. And that's actually a big piece of what coaching is about, is noticing your thoughts. And so mindfulness is even, you're not necessarily calling out the thoughts, but you're just noticing the moment of when something shifts and you take that pause. So what the stimulus does to you, and then be more intentional. The other thing I like to teach is the power of presence. And this, again, is something you can do anywhere, anytime. When you're in a room with a patient, you're having a conversation at home or with an attending, just realizing that you don't need to be anywhere else. And so many of us, and many people brought this up in the last month too, which is why I wanted to raise it, is this idea of, we've been trained for delayed gratification. We're always planning for the end of fellowship, or what we're going to do next, or we're going to feel better on vacation, if we ever get to go anywhere anymore, or we'll feel better on Saturday on our hike. And this idea that you can gain so much from being present wherever you are in that moment, and just pausing to be there, and realizing one thought that a lot of people come to is, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be right now. And that's a thought that we practice in coaching, because it takes out this constant brain chatter about, whether you should have done something before, should have done something after. A lot of people wonder, am I the right person to do that procedure? If someone else were here, they would be able to do a better job, or someone else were on call. And so all of this sort of judgment that gets in the way of performing at your highest level, which you want to do. It's not so much for the grade or for the evaluation, but how you want to showing up as who you would like to. A couple other thoughts. Let me just have a sip of water here. Is the power, and this again goes right back to mindfulness, but it's also a coaching tenet of accepting and allowing rather than resisting. And so it's that concept I talked about in the middle, rather than in the beginning, about the smoke. Like, you can resist the smoke and say, this is terrible, and be frustrated and just upset. Or you can say, wow, I tried to do this on that apocalypse day. Like, I'm just curious about this. What is going on? And why is there no sun? And why is there no sky? And what happens there? And so say you're in the midst of a patient encounter, you can just be curious and allow yourself to be curious. And that can be very, very helpful. So I encourage curiosity as an approach, especially when things aren't going as you like. Whether it's with a colleague or at home or anywhere, really thinking about that. So the other things that have come up is people having different expectations of the fellowship. It's not turning out as they thought. It's busier than they thought, slower than they thought. They're not as fast as they thought they would be. They're not respected enough. It's usually about an enough thing. They maybe think they don't know enough. And so this idea, again, that if you can accept and allow it as it is and drop that resistance, it gives you so much more energy to do the work and learn and be much more open and receptive to learning. And so one of the things we talk about in coaching is this concept of accepting and allowing. And so I just throw that out there because I think it's useful to just have it in your head and be like, oh yeah, look, I'm resisting that. So we talk about resisting reality, and it's just human nature, but notice when you're doing it, because it can be a very powerful tool to let go of that a little bit. And then the last two things I wanted to bring up that have come up with a number of your colleagues is this idea of scarcity mentality, and really focusing on what's not going right and what's not as you think it should be. Not enough time, not enough of anything, essentially not enough knowledge. And so as healers and sort of the culture of medicine is very much focused on scarcity. And it's been just drilled into us. So thinking about that and looking for, we call it like looking for abundance. And so looking for places in your life where things are going well, or where something feels good, or where you have enough. And that can just change your experience. And again, it's not Pollyanna, but it's just training your mind to look for some of those things. So some people think about it as gratitude. I like to think about it as like, how are you abundant? Because usually we can think of a few things. It doesn't have to be everything, but shifting away from what you don't have, or what's not going well, or how many colleagues do you enjoy working with? Because usually there's one you don't enjoy and 20 you do enjoy. And so just looking at that and saying, oh, I have 20 colleagues I enjoy, rather than one who's changing my experience of fellowship, for example. And then looking at what's in your control, and whether you're trying to control things that are out of your control. And we often want other people to behave differently. And so in coaching, we often look at the other people, and what our thoughts are, and noticing that we want them to behave differently, and we think that that will change our experience. When you can change your thoughts about it and realize like, oh, that's not in my control. I can't fix that, but this is what's in my control. And so for many people who might have, different anxiety about things, or, in the beginning of COVID, a lot of people had tremendous anxiety about working in anesthesia with COVID. And this idea that focusing on what's in your control, which is your thoughts and your voice and your actions, if you just go right to that, it's not anybody else. It's not whether, it's not the medical system, or the change in the rules, or the change in the protocols, or any of those things. They're all out of your control. But if you focus on what's in your control, it can shift a really uncomfortable experience to a better one. I'm not going to say a fabulous one, but a better one. So what I would love to do at this point is just see what struggles any of you have specifically or individually, things that have come up for you. And I thought I'd share a couple more things that had come up for some of your colleagues, and then we'll do some live coaching if anybody's willing to bring something up. And I will remind folks of sort of how we do that. Does anyone want to just put in the chat box, which is in the bottom middle, things that you're struggling with, or anything like that? Feel free. And I know it feels often a bit uncomfortable to share at this point. And what I'll say is, the more people share, and the more shared struggles that you have, I think people find more support and less burnout and emotional exhaustion, and support, feeling less isolated. So I'll mention a couple things, and a couple of things that some of your colleagues had found helpful. And then I'm hoping that one or two of you will be willing to just bring up something that you're struggling with, and we'll do some gentle coaching since it's the first session, and I won't record that part, but just to give you a taste of how some of these tools can work. So I wanted to bring up just the concept of imposter syndrome, which several people have mentioned in their sessions, and very common thoughts of like, I don't belong, or I don't know enough. I'm starting behind, I should know more. And so realizing that that is what we call imposter syndrome. And a couple of strategies for that are asking yourself, is it true? Like, should you actually know more than you know already? Probably not. And, do you actually not belong? Well, they accepted you, so you probably do. And I like to have people think about, almost all of you have, at least in my experience, 9 years of training. Some of you maybe even have more. And so really honing in on what are some of the facts that you have about this. How many times have you done a procedure? How long have you been preparing to do this fellowship role? So even though it's new and may feel uncomfortable, that's okay. It's of course going to feel uncomfortable because it's new. So just kind of diving into that and realizing that everyone feels the same. Another thought that can be helpful, it's getting kind of dark, is this idea of I'm doing the best I can, and that can be really helpful. And so a lot of people feel like, well, it's not good enough. But if you're doing the best you can, by definition, that has to be good enough, because that's what you can do. And so oftentimes just digging into that thought can be helpful. And then another thing that's come up is like an unexpected outcome, or maybe a procedure that didn't go right, or something you couldn't get that you felt like you should, or a patient who you couldn't convince, or the encounter didn't go right. And so many fellows think, I did something wrong, is their thought. And what did I do wrong? What was my mistake? And it comes from a good place because you're wanting to learn from the mistake. But what happens is you end up feeling guilty, distracted, nervous, start ruminating about whatever happened. And you then you're not showing up as the best person who can learn from it and do better next time. And so, and another thought that for those of you in pain, there's a lot of issues about like charting, is my understanding, that it takes a long time to chart, and, it's taking longer than it should, or I'm not as quick as I should, or I'm not, my plans are not right. I'm not as fast as I should be yet. And so this idea that you are right where you're supposed to be, like if it's taking that long, that's how it's supposed to be today. It doesn't mean that you won't get better and you can't learn. But if you have instead a different thought, like, well, I'm here to learn, or I'm here to grow, or this happens, if it's an outcome, like 3% of the time, this happens, or this is the 1 in 20 that didn't work. So now I have the 19 and 20. If you know that there's a percentage of the time that, procedure maybe isn't perfect, you can just focus on that. And so I feel like those thoughts, flipping them, can lead you to a more calm place where you're much more open to look at, oh, what can I do to make this charting faster? Or what can I do so that this procedure goes better next time? Whereas this approach to beating yourself up and second guessing yourself tends to lead to rumination and distraction, which can be quite a problem. And then the last thing that has come up a few times is victimhood, and sort of coloring, having that idea of being a victim of being too busy, or the system, or having given so much time to this and how it's not going right. And that being willing to shift that mindset to maybe how this is happening for you, how the program is working, that you're here to learn, or it's exactly as it should be, can be a really powerful switch for people. So I'd like to just throw those thoughts out, and you can pick whichever ones work for you in the coaching here, or in one-on-one coaching. You get to work through very specific thoughts that might work for your brain. And so some of the ones I've mentioned might work for you, or you might need to tweak them. The idea with the new thoughts is that they have to be 100% believable. So the old thoughts, which are your habitual ones, they are already 100% believable. The new ones also have to be 100% believable, but they lead to very different outcomes and experiences. And so you're replacing them, but you have to replace them with something that works. So what I'd like to do, I was going to see if anybody wants to do individual coaching. And let me just stop the recording first.